Today, I want to talk to you about abusive relationships and how pervasive they are, and that they are, by the time they get physical, they have already been emotional and psychological. We know statistically, globally, 1 in 3 girls or women are physically abused, which means far more than that have been and are currently being emotionally and psychologically abused. We know about the 70,000 men on the Telegraph chat, and that means that there's just one of many of those chats going on right now. And every day, like today, we see another horrific story. I saw one that talked about a woman who had been set on fire and died at the hands of her husband after giving birth to their 3rd child because it was a girl. This happens around the world, in towns, in villages, and in cities. It happens in all socioeconomic levels, all education levels, among the people who have some of the fanciest jobs to some of the most modest. And we talk about it in a passive tense, which I don't understand. We say 1 in 3 women are abused. Who is abusing them? Statistically, if 1 in 3 women are abused, it would imply that, give or take, 1 in 3 men are abusive. And even if we're being generous, even if some of those men are just extra active, basically we can assume that 25% of men are physically abusive, which means psychologically and emotionally, that statistic is much higher. And while the physical abuse, if somebody sees it and if it's documented, is visible, the internal scars from the emotional and the psychological abuse are invisible, but you carry them just the same. I think a lot of times we are in denial, particularly because of aesthetic stereotypes, somebody's education, their career, how they present themselves publicly, as opposed to who we see behind the scenes privately. I have only had successful partners, and I would say all but 1-2 of them were psychologically and emotionally abusive to me. And I think had I stuck around with a few of them, a couple of them would have put me in the hospital at some point, because it only gets worse. And it happens in plain sight. I want to tell you a story which, considering what is happening to girls and women around the world, is light. It is light stuff. It has haunted me, and it is one of many stories that I have about several men. But it will show you that it is in plain sight, and it does not choose its victims selectively. These men are everywhere. And if that many women are abused and that many men are abusing them, it means statistically, we know all of them. We are related to them. We work with them, we socialize with them, we go to school with them. They are in our families. Sometimes they are in your own home. I want to also tell you about how to be safe and how to be careful and how to know how to protect yourself better and know when it's time to take care of yourself and not go looking for love elsewhere. It was 2016. I was working in Singapore. I had a quite respectable corporate job. I was making adult money. I was doing my executive MBA at INSEAD, which is a very fancy business school. It was my 4th degree. I come from an educated family, and I myself have 4 degrees. And I was traveling all over Asia. I had a very demanding job. And I was in the midst of also having to find a new job because the team that I was a part of was going to be disbanded after a massive post-merger integration across 7 countries and 3 companies that I was in fact running. I had been dating an Australian man during this time who I had suspected was cheating on me and confirmed it. And we had a horrific breakup. And in the midst of all of this, I had to move out of the apartment in about a week. It was a horrific time. And thankfully, I had some amazing girlfriends, one of whom flew in from America to come take care of me for a week, one of whom flew in from Cambodia, and one of whom flew in from Vietnam. So I have nothing but love for those women. And I even had a great boss at the time who really saw me through a terrible storm in my life. But what do? I am feeling bad about myself, and I'm feeling vulnerable, and I'm also, newly single, and I rebound with a classmate of mine. He's a very tall, good-looking, cute man, not much to say, no personality, no sense of humor, but I was easy pickings. I was very easy pickings. And so we end up having a fling, which he decides he needs to make public and official. I did not want to do that. I did not know him well enough. I should have put my foot down at that point. But he was such a master gaslighter that whenever I had an opinion that disagreed with him, and bear in mind, I had just come out of a terrible relationship, he blamed me. Like I was the one making him feel bad. Like I was the one doing him wrong, even though all I wanted to do was slow down. But he insisted, and so then it became public. And now 200 people knew that we were dating. In this relationship, he was two completely different people. He was one person publicly and one person privately. Of course, only I saw the private person. He was very good at getting very romantic, big gesture gifts. I got tons of roses. I got some fabulous clothes. It didn't matter. There would also be times where we were in class together and he didn't like what I said, or he didn't like how I was at dinner, and he would not speak to me for days because I disagreed with his point of view. That is how juvenile this man was. And it was such a public relationship. And I think myself, I want to think of myself as a strong woman. I was in Asia by myself for a decade. I put a lot of runs on the boards professionally. At that point, I was closing out my 4th degree. I didn't think women like me were vulnerable. This man said the most horrific, horrendous things to me throughout our relationship, but in private, of course. And then in front of our class and socially, he was, nice to everybody, even if he was ghosting me. And we would go on and off, on and off. We had an elective in France for 2 weeks that he completely ruined for me. He fought with me nonstop. And at one point in time, he had such a temper tantrum, and he had gone off and come back in the middle of the night and stormed into my room at 4 a.m. And I swear to God, I thought this man was going to kill me. He is 6'4". Bear in mind, I am 5'3". And at that point in time, I probably weighed like 110 pounds. And the sight of him coming into my room at night still is one of the most haunting things I've ever seen. That relationship was excruciating, and I eventually found my way out of it. Frankly, we both found our way out of it because he realized that unlike the other women he had been with, he was not going to be able to control me, and we were not going to get along. And so we broke up sometime towards the end of the summer. It was like August or something. Basically, we still had to be in class together. We still had to sort of see each other. Everyone sort of knew we were on bad terms, and I kept my mouth shut. We had another elective in Abu Dhabi, and this was in October. And we had broken up at that point for about 2 months, and we were not speaking. There was no reason. A week before that elective, my grandmother, the matriarch of our family, had passed away. And I was hanging on for dear life. I was working full time. I was exhausted. My body was barely functioning. I was on a plane constantly. I was still going to school, and I was still looking for a new job, and I didn't know if I was going to make it. I was down in Singapore, you have employment passes. I was down to months. And it really came down to the wire, and it did. It really came down to the wire at that time. And so we were in Abu Dhabi for an elective, and some of us had gone there early. He basically always tried to control my movement, and he tried to control my speech. He tried to control my communications. Even if I would message the class on WhatsApp or something, he would privately message me and tell me I shouldn't have said that, or I wasn't allowed to say that, or why am I speaking to everybody. He basically wanted to pretend I wasn't even there. And he even said himself he didn't think any of the women in our class deserved to be there. Bear in mind, our Asia class was only about 60 odd people, and only 15 of them were women. And he still basically acted like none of the women deserved to be in that class, and only the men had earned their spots. There were PhDs in the class. There were lawyers in the class. These women were highly, highly educated. I am not the only one who was working on multiple post-grad degrees. There were some very successful women in our class. So we are in Abu Dhabi, and, we're keeping our distance. And he comes up to me out of nowhere. The elective was just wrapping up. And we were in this like bar lounge that was attached to the hotel. Everyone was having drinks. The music was good. We were dancing. We were letting off some steam. He comes over to me and he says, can I talk to you for a moment? And at that point I should have known better and said no, but I tried to be mature about it. I thought, okay, fine. So we walk over to the bar and he says, look, I just want you to know we're not getting back together. Literally, I realized I was looking at the craziest man I'd ever met. And I was like, yeah, don't worry. Like, there was no way I was trying to get back into an abusive relationship. And I was like, don't worry. I was dumbfounded and I left. He obviously doesn't like that response. He storms out the club. I'd pay him no mind. I hope he went to bed. He didn't. He came back as I was dancing with everyone on the dance floor. And in my ear, so that no one could hear him but me, said, why don't you leave? Nobody wants you here. And this was his running theme throughout the whole time we were fighting. And I was already an outsider. I get it. I'm unique, to say the least. I get it. But I meant no one any harm. And I didn't really have any beef with anyone in the class. I was perhaps hard to understand at times, and that is because I am an East African, British, American, single Indian woman in Asia. I don't fit any stereotype. I get that. But he always made me feel like everybody hated me because he was the star of the show, and that if he didn't want me there, I wasn't allowed to be there. I have never gotten out of character, except this one time. And frankly, I don't regret it. And so when he says that, the rage of my grandmother, and I feel like all my female ancestors who have been through just bullshit with men their entire life, just erupted out of me. And I basically put my hand in his face, well, like that. He was much taller. And I pushed him back. And I basically said, stay the fuck away from me. He, of course, acts like he's a victim and can't believe my outburst and doesn't know what's going on. And he was just standing there and I came out of nowhere. Of course, no one heard what he said to me but me. And so I start cursing at him. About 3-4 guys break us up. I couldn't have hurt him, but the theatrics were kind of funny at the time. I felt a little cool, even though I have never done something like that before, and I haven't to this day. But you know what? I don't regret standing up for myself. And he ran out of that club and was talking to, some other woman in our class on the sidewalk when I left. A classmate of mine, he knew I was completely shaken. And to a certain extent, I guess I still am. And took me back to my room and made sure I calmed down. And from then on, and he had already been running a brilliant PR campaign for himself the entire time. He had already made himself look like such a lovely, stand-up, respectable, white man in Asia who has far more power than he is entitled to or deserves. And of course, I was supposed to be the crazy brown girl. He destroyed my reputation in the class. Of course, everyone played telephone, and I can't imagine, people probably said I knocked him out, or, I did some jujitsu on him. I have no idea. Those rumors were running rampant. And I told people how abusive he was. And it was actually very interesting. There were women who didn't believe me, and actually some men who did. But by and large, I kept my mouth shut, and he just ruined my reputation after he had completely emotionally devastated me, psychologically, just ripped me to shreds, and then went for my reputation, which he was very good at. I say all this to say I realize that this seems like a minor indiscretion compared to what is happening to women right now. And you know what? And it is. That is the sick part about it. It is. I volunteer at women's shelters. I have met women from around the world. People have told me their life stories. And I assure you, the things I have been told and the eyes that I have seen, they will forever haunt me. And I say all this to say that you need to believe yourself first. And when you see the first sign of trouble, privately is when you need to get out. Trust what you see. Trust the man in front of you, the boy in front of you, the child in front of you. Don't believe who he is publicly when he is doing his best PR campaign. And this man would buy me gifts sometimes if I were behaving well. Don't believe any of it. Believe who you see in private, and believe yourself. Believe your intuition. Believe your mind. Believe your heart. Believe your body. And believe women. I cannot believe that it is 2025 and it seems like the epidemic of emotional, psychological, physical violence against women. I don't even know if it's at an all-time high. No one really knows. All I do know is that literally, statistically, billions of women on Earth are going through this and have been through this throughout history. And if we don't bring an end to it, if we don't check these men, and if we don't protect ourselves, this will keep going on. And this will keep going on with your daughters and your granddaughters. And there's nothing in it for us. So please, 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 please trust yourself, protect the women in your life.